In the register of the abbey, his name appeared once and only once, Matthew, pilgrim. No lineage was recorded beside it, no place of birth, no witness. Such omissions were common in that century, when men were measured less by where they came from than by how quietly they endured. Names faded quickly, suffering did not. He left before dawn, when the sky still held the color of old tin and the fields breathed out the night's dampness. The road lay before him narrow and uneven, marked by ruts filled with stagnant water. Each step pressed a dull sound from the earth, as though the land itself were reluctant to be disturbed. His boots were worn thin, their leather softened by rain and dust, and the soles no longer trusted. Yet he walked. The air smelled of wet straw, smoke from distant hearths, and the faint sourness of rot hidden beneath fallen leaves. He carried little, a staff smoothed by hands he would never know, a cloak mended too many times, and a pouch with bread already growing hard. What he carried inside himself was heavier. A vow, spoken once in a chapel lit by trembling candles, bound him to the road. Why he had sworn it no longer remained clear. Sin, grief, or fear, all wore the same face after enough time. The bells of the priory rang prime behind him. Their sound followed for a while, then thinned, then vanished. Silence took its place. Not an empty silence, but one thick with distant crows, wind through naked branches, and the quiet labor of insects beneath the soil. Matthew felt, with a slow certainty, that once the bells were gone, something within him had also loosened its hold. Fear did not strike sharply. It seeped. Fear of wolves at dusk, of men who watched roads too closely, of sickness that could empty a body before a prayer was finished. Beneath all of it lay a deeper unease, that the road would take his strength, his years, his faith, and leave him nothing in return. Time behaved strangely for pilgrims. Days passed, yet nothing seemed to move forward. Villages resembled one another, prayers repeated themselves, hunger returned with a reliable patience. Faith, Matthew learned, was not ecstasy. It was endurance, the decision to rise again when the reason for rising had grown thin. He did not know that the shrine would never be reached. History rarely grants its subjects such mercy. It allows them only motion and silence. And so Matthew walked. By the third month upon the road, Matthew noticed that his voice no longer answered him readily. When he spoke, it was as if the sound had to travel a great distance before reaching his mouth. Words emerged slowly, uncertain of their purpose. Often, he chose silence instead. Silence asked nothing in return. The villages came rarely now, scattered like remnants of a forgotten prayer. Their houses leaned inward, timber darkened by age and smoke, roofs patched with whatever hands could find. In each place, the people watched him with a guarded courtesy. Pilgrims were familiar figures, yet never entirely welcome. They arrived with empty hands and carried invisible burdens that unsettled those who had learned to endure their own. Charity was offered carefully. A heel of bread, coarse and dry, tasting faintly of ash. A cup of water drawn from a well that smelled of iron and old stone. Sometimes a place near the animals, where warmth rose from bodies and dung alike. At night, Matthew lay upon straw flattened by countless sleepers before him. The scent of mold and sweat clung to the air, thick enough to rest upon the tongue. Sleep did not come cleanly. When it came, it carried dreams without faces, corridors that narrowed endlessly, bells ringing with no source, doors that opened onto more doors. He would wake to the sound of rats moving beneath the floor, their small claws scraping patiently, as though they understood time better than men ever could. Isolation did not wound him sharply. It hollowed him, carefully, like water wearing away stone. Days passed without his name being spoken. Weeks without a hand laid upon his shoulder. The shrine, once vivid in his thoughts, crowned with candles and stone, blurred into abstraction. He began to wonder whether it had ever existed as more than an idea shaped by longing. The road itself seemed indifferent. It offered neither guidance nor refusal. Mud pulled at his boots, stones bruised the soles of his feet. In the evenings, wind carried the smell of distant fires, reminders of hearths where stories were told, bread was broken, and time was measured by lives shared. Matthew listened to those smells as one listens to music from another room. Faith, in such quiet, changed its shape. It ceased to be certainty and became habit. He prayed not with hope, but with discipline. The words steadied him, even as their meanings thinned. He wondered whether belief was meant to save the soul, or merely to prevent it from collapsing inward under the weight of solitude. Time did not advance. It circled. Morning followed night, hunger followed eating, doubt followed prayer. In that repetition, Matthew felt something loosening, not his vow, but his sense of belonging to any moment at all. Still, he walked. Because stopping required a reason. And reasons, like voices, were becoming difficult to hear. The road narrowed as Matthew entered lands held not by custom, but by decree. The air itself seemed altered there, heavier, as though words spoken carelessly might sink into the ground and be carried elsewhere. At the edges of fields stood wooden posts marked with symbols of ownership, the sign of the Lord, carved deep and renewed often, as if fear required constant maintenance. It was near one such boundary that he encountered the men. They were not soldiers in the proud sense sung by minstrels, but retainers, cloaked in dull colors, mail worn beneath wool, hands resting close to weapons that had tasted use. Their horses stamped impatiently, releasing the sharp smell of sweat and leather into the cold air. They asked him where he came from. He answered simply. They asked where he was going. He hesitated. The shrine, once named easily, felt fragile now, as though saying it aloud might break what little shape it retained. His pause was noted. Authority, Matthew understood, did not need violence immediately. It thrived on uncertainty. The men searched his pouch, fingers rough against cloth, indifferent to his quiet compliance. They found nothing of value. Still, they lingered, eyes measuring his body as one measures livestock, not for what it was, but for what could be extracted from it. You walk too far for a poor man, one said, almost kindly. That night, Matthew was permitted to sleep in a shed near the manor wall. Permission, he learned, was its own form of confinement. The stone radiated cold. Somewhere beyond it, a household moved through candlelit rooms, accompanied by laughter, the clink of metal, the warmth of abundance. Inside the shed, the smell of damp hay and old urine pressed close. Mice rustled in the dark, unafraid. He lay awake, listening to the slow passage of hours marked by nothing more than his breath and the distant shift of guards changing watch. Power revealed itself not in cruelty, but in indifference. The Lord would never know his name. Yet the Lord's will shaped the ground beneath him, determined where he could walk, where he could sleep, and how easily his body might vanish without record. In the silence, Matthew thought of death, not with terror, but with a measured curiosity. Death, at least, ended questions. It closed the long corridor of choice and doubt. And yet, something in him resisted that closure. Not hope. Habit, perhaps. Or a stubborn loyalty to the vow that still bound him, even as its meaning eroded. By morning, he was released with a gesture. No words of blessing or warning followed. He stepped back onto the road, aware that nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The world felt less accidental now, more arranged, as though unseen hands adjusted pieces beyond his sight. Freedom, he realized, was not the absence of chains. It was the space between one command and the next. And that space was narrowing. He walked on, carrying the knowledge quietly, like a bruise beneath his cloak. Illness came without ceremony. No omen marked its arrival, no warning dream. One morning Matthew woke with a weight in his chest, as though the night had not fully released him. His breath sounded altered, shallow, edged with a faint rasp. When he stood, the world tilted briefly, then settled into a quieter, more distant version of itself. He continued walking. Pilgrims learned early that the body was not consulted. The road did not pause for weakness. Yet with each mile, his steps shortened, and the staff bore more of his weight. His sweat cooled too quickly upon his skin, leaving him chilled even beneath the sun. The smell of his own breath troubled him, sour, unfamiliar, as if decay had begun its patient work. Villages grew rarer still. Fields lay fallow, their soil pale and exhausted. When he found shelter, it was often alone, and abandoned by a collapsed shed, the lee side of a ruined chapel whose stones still carried the cold of forgotten prayers. In such places, sound behaved strangely. A cough echoed too long. The wind seemed to speak in broken syllables. Silence pressed close, intimate and unyielding. Time altered its nature. Hours stretched without movement, then vanished entirely. Pain arrived not sharply, but like a tide, rising and falling without pattern. In those intervals, Matthew prayed. Not for healing. Not even for arrival. He prayed for understanding, a fragile request, easily ignored. God did not answer. Or perhaps the answer came in forms too subtle for speech, in the slow acceptance of weakness, in the realization that the body was not an enemy, but a record. Each ache marked a season survived. Each scar was time made visible. He remembered, faintly, a childhood winter, the smell of boiled roots, the sound of his mother's breathing in the dark. That memory felt no more solid than the present. Past and future thinned, leaving only sensation, the grit of dirt between his teeth, the dull ache in his joints, the rhythm of breath measured carefully, like a precious resource. Death no longer appeared distant. It walked beside him, unhurried, attentive. Matthew did not fear it. He feared only that his passing would mean nothing, that his vow would dissolve unfulfilled, absorbed by the road without trace. One evening, fevered and trembling, he lay beneath a sky stripped of clouds. Stars burned with indifferent clarity. He thought then that faith might not be belief in salvation, but the courage to continue without it. To walk without promise. To love the road even when it led nowhere. By morning, he rose again. Weaker, slower, but still moving. Time had claimed more of him, but not all. And as long as something remained, the road would receive it. At some point, Matthew ceased to count the days. Not deliberately, the habit simply loosened and fell away. Morning and evening remained, light and dark, hunger and rest. Beyond that, time no longer presented itself as something that could be measured. It was endured. The shrine, once named with reverence, had grown indistinct. He no longer imagined its stones or candles, nor the reliquary said to hold the martyr's bones. When the thought of it arose, it did so without image, without weight, a direction rather than a destination. Westward. Always westward. As if the earth itself were gently turning him that way. His body had learned new limits. Pain no longer surprised him, it announced itself with the familiarity of an old companion. His hands shook when he tried to break bread. His breath carried a faint whistle, especially at night, when cold settled into his chest. The smell of damp wool clung to him constantly now, mingled with the metallic scent of sickness. He had become aware of himself as others must have been aware of him all along, a figure shaped by endurance rather than purpose. He encountered fewer people. When he did, they seemed hurried, anxious to pass. Pilgrims reminded them of unfinished vows, promises made in desperation. Better not to look too closely. Better not to ask. In solitude, faith reshaped itself again. It was no longer prayer spoken aloud, nor words traced in memory. It became attention. To the way frost silvered grass in the morning. To the sound of crows disputing ownership of a carcass. To the ache that flared, then faded, then returned, proof that he still inhabited the world. Freedom revealed itself strangely here. Not as choice, but as release. The release from needing an answer. From demanding meaning. Matthew understood, dimly, that the vow had already done its work. It had stripped him of certainty, of illusion, of the belief that arrival justified suffering. One night, sheltering beneath the broken arch of a roadside cross, he felt a quiet clarity. If he were to die here, the road would not remember him. But the road did not remember anyone. It only received. And perhaps that was enough. He slept without dreams. When he woke, the shrine did not return to him. Only the road did. And he rose to meet it, lighter now, not in body, but in expectation. He did not know the moment when walking became an echo of walking. There was no clear dividing line, no final step that declared itself as such. The road continued as it always had, pale, uneven, patient. What changed was Matthew's manner of inhabiting it. His body moved with the care of something already half remembered. The morning was cold, though the season had turned. Mist clung low to the ground, carrying the smell of wet stone and decaying leaves. Each breath burned faintly, then softened. His staff struck the earth with a sound both familiar and distant, like a bell heard from beneath water. He reached a rise where the land opened briefly. Beyond it lay fields and a river winding like dull silver. No shrine stood there. No marker. Only the quiet persistence of the world. Matthew stopped, not because he had decided to, but because his body no longer offered the choice. He Saturday. The ground was cold through the thin cloth of his trousers. He noticed, with a historian's calm, the details, the slow movement of clouds, the caw of a crow, the ache settling deeply into his bones. There was no fear. Only a growing stillness. He thought, then, of death not as an ending, but as a release from direction. Time would no longer ask him to move forward. Faith would no longer require form. Freedom, at last, would be without obligation. The vow did not accuse him. It loosened, quietly, like a knot undone by patient fingers. He understood, not with certainty, but with acceptance, that the pilgrimage had never been about arrival. It had been about offering oneself to time without demand. Matthew lay down. The road did not close around him. It did not mourn. It received him as it had received countless others, without memory, without judgment. By evening, travelers passed without noticing the shape beside the path. Rain came later. The earth softened. What remained of him returned, slowly, to the soil. Somewhere, the shrine continued to exist, or perhaps it did not. History made no effort to decide. It recorded only this, that a man walked, endured, and vanished between one step and the next. And the road went on.